Today I have a fantastic conversation with Leslie Zetler from Felbridge, a cannabis cultivator in the Western Cape of South Africa who's become a global go-to for sourcing of genetic input material. Not only do they supply locally, but they also supply internationally to countries like Switzerland, Spain, Lesotho, North Macedonia, Israel, and most recently Canada. We had a detailed discussion as well about how to improve hemp in South Africa, specifically on topics related to percentage THC, amendments to the Plant and Improvement Act, as well as the Drug and Drug Trafficking Act. We then take a closer look at Switzerland and what made that market successful and what lessons Felbridge learned from their partner PureGene in the territory. In addition, we talk about their 100,000 clone capacity per run that was built in partnership with Perfect Plants. And then we go into technical terms like what is a phytosanitary certificate? What does it all mean and how they're starting to drive this in terms of getting exports successfully across international markets. Lastly, we take a look at how to make cannabis far more inclusive in the context of South Africa. I'm going to take you through a quick overview of the facility and then be sure to stay to the end of the interview where we take a far more detailed look at the actual facility setup at Felbridge. I hope you enjoy this interview and the spirit with which it's shared. Hi Leslie, it's great to have you on today. I know that Felbridge has positioned themselves as a go-to partner for genetic inputs on cultivation of cannabis and hemp. But before we get into that discussion, could you maybe give us a bit of context and background on what motivated the team and yourself at Felbridge to get into this industry?
Hi, Jeff. Firstly, thanks for the opportunity to be on the show. It's really, we watch it every week and we just love it. So we've been farming for 4 generations. You know, this is what our family does. We started in strawberries and then started very quickly supplying retailers. We're one of the oldest suppliers to retail in the country. And so we viewed cannabis as just another crop. You know, it needs water, it needs nutrients, it's got pest issues. And we just thought of it as the next crop. You know, we looked at the existing crops that are out there, and like all commercial crops, you know, margins are diminishing. And we thought cannabis would be an opportunity to reset that margin. So, yeah, we thought of it as a really good opportunity to get into.
No, awesome, 100%. I mean, you guys have also taken a very unique approach. I mean, very often I've seen this strong focus on medicinal high THC flower, where Felbridge is really focused on a different aspect in terms of really enabling local support and international companies with your genetic supply. And could you maybe give us just a bit of an idea of the different SKUs, you know, the type of products, whether that's the clones, the tissue culture, well, what does Felbridge supply to the international and local cannabis and hemp communities?
Yeah, so when we got into this, again, we approached this like farmers and understanding that you just can't have one revenue stream. You can't bank your whole business on a one product. So we got into this very much saying, well, we're quite early on in the process. We were probably about the 5th or 6th letter of positive recommendation that SAPRA issued. So we had an advantage that we could get the genetics in, we could get it in hopefully before the other guys. We could do the phenotyping. We could, run the genetics and see how they work under our conditions. So we thought of that as an opportunity. You know, why not be able to supply starting materials to the industry and add that to a basket of products. So, I mean, our first product was obviously the CBD flower. I think people have a bit of a misconception about us. You know, we're not in CBD because we want to be in CBD. You know, we see CBD as a really good starting point to make mistakes, work on our compliance, get everything in place, and over time migrate into THC. I mean, CBD isn't it's not a high value crop at this point, and I don't think it's going to be. So we're using that as our springboard to get into THC. And when we're in THC, we've got the scale right. We're not making mistakes. We've really perfected the business, and we've made the mistakes on the lower value CBD part of the business.
Yeah, 100%. I like as well, I mean, from previous discussions, you've got a real focus on capacitating and scale, and we're going to talk about aspects of that today. But it's also nice to have seen the success you've had in terms of the exports. North Macedonia, Israel, Spain, Lesotho, recently Canada. So congratulations on that as well for genetic starting material. So we're going to unpack all of that as well. But before we come around to that one, let's maybe go back to, I know you're very passionate about enabling local support. And we've had this discussion, and it's a serious one because it's about how to really enable local cultivators, particularly in the hemp space as well, around genetics. Like, I know you've raised in the past, like, 3 very good points specifically on this where, can you take it from your perspective? Because you've been in the space for a while, you have a very strong agricultural background, you understand the export market, but more specifically, you understand some of the restraints locally. What really needs to happen in terms of improvement and reforms to really get the hemp industry and associated cannabis industry off the ground in South Africa?
Yeah, I think we've like you mentioned, we've got basically 3 ideas. Listen, we can't tell government what to do or the regulators. I think it has to come from them. But in being in the industry and seeing the challenges, if there were 3 things that could very quickly unlock the industry, the first would be removing cannabis off the Drugs Act.
Yeah.
And that basically really is a starting point. I mean, to have a crop on the Drugs Act really isn't conducive to trying to grow the industry. Our president's saying that, but get it off the drugs. Let's remove that stigma. Let's get police and all the law enforcement to focus on other issues at the moment. The second thing for us is lifting the minimum THC limits from 0.2% to 1%.
Yeah.
And we've seen what this has done to the Swiss market. It opened up the entire hemp and cannabis space. And it also started to take that stigma away from cannabis, from very traditional people who aren't involved in the industry or being hesitant to even look at it as a medicine. People could now grow hemp. They could make products out of it. They could use the fiber. They could use the seed. There's just a lot more scope now that it's been taken from 0.2 to 1%. The other issue is in South Africa, we're issuing hemp permits. But to my knowledge, I don't know how someone's going to grow hemp under 0.2%, under radiation that we get. I mean, even in Switzerland, they can't guarantee below 0.2%. So, just that alone is a non-starter. You just can't do it without going higher. And 1% is kind of becoming the new norm. I mean, Switzerland's done it, Czech Republic. I think even it's either Uganda or Malawi. One of the 2
Malawi,
also.
Malawi's done it. Even Colombia has done the psychoactive definition as 1% for THC and anything under. So it's already 4 completely different jurisdictions and different environments, and they kind of all have a consensus. And I support what you're saying fully. Like, it's just practical, to be honest.
Yeah, the third thing is something that we've noticed, and I think is going to be an impediment, is cannabis is not a registered crop on the Plant Improvement Act. So you've got apples, tomatoes, strawberries. Cannabis isn't there. And the important thing is that it needs to be recognized as a crop because, when it starts moving to the industrial side or to protein or to, any use, you're going to want to get fertilizers registered on it. You're going to want to get chemicals registered on it. The other thing is you can't register genetics against a crop that's not on the crop list. So, how are we going to protect IP in this country if a breeder comes into this country and says, oh, I've got a fantastic genetic, but I would like some protection on it? And I think that's just a basic requirement in terms of agriculture and IP protection. We need to get that in place. And what that does is also when breeders and genetics companies know that their IP is protected, that's where they invest. And that's when you're going to see breeding centers opening up in South Africa. You're going to see seed production start to open up. We're a member of SANSOR, South African National Seed Organization. The issue at the moment is we would love to go into seed production and produce certified seed to be able to export to other countries. But, the certification scheme only works if the crop's registered. So, these are just three things that we think, if they were just opened up, would really accelerate growth in the sector.
Yeah, I mean your point on the Plant Improvement Act and as a registered crop, it's almost so fundamental. Like without that, all these innovations, all this capitalization into the
Yeah.
local sector is just it's delayed, and it's been delayed unfortunately for too long already. And it's something where I fully support that. Like you're completely right. There's all these things like the chemicals, the pesticides, getting that associated to the crop. So it's such a good point, and it hasn't been raised often enough. But it's fantastic that you're raising it because it is really the limitations in terms of scaling in the space, and also the IP is, I mean, and you can speak to IP because let's use the Swiss market maybe as a benchmark because you guys have been successful in the Swiss market. You've got PureGene as a partner in the Swiss region. They're a great company as well. Often I think it's important to frame the story for stakeholders in government. I mean, they see numbers, they see prohibition partners reports, but they can't contextualize it. You've seen the success of the Swiss market firsthand in terms of your PureGene involvement. Like that moving to 1% for retail products as well, for sale in terms of the cap on the THC, on the CBD flower. Like what was your experience? And if you maybe had to summarize it, like how did Switzerland get it right in terms of enabling things along the lines of CBD, hemp flower, and unlocking a different vertical that was maybe unique in Europe to a large extent?
Yeah. Yeah. So the Swiss model is really interesting. And how they went about it was politicians accepted that they didn't know, and they weren't sure, and they didn't know which way to go. There was a push for people for government to open it up, but to what level do we open it up? So they did it, and I think the way it should be done. They commissioned studies, and they said, what is a safe level of THC to have in cannabis? And obviously, opponents to cannabis said, 0 or as low as possible, and proponents of it said, as high as possible. Take it to 2, take it to 3, or just open it up completely. And they commissioned studies about this. And the studies came back and said, 1% is a completely safe level. And that's the way they should go. And they adopted the study and brought that in. And what that did was it opened up, it didn't open up the medicinal cannabis space. It just said anything below 1% is completely unregulated and falls under their Office of Public Health, which isn't like SAPRA. It's kind of like Department of Health, and vitamins and those kinds of things. And then they created tobacco replacements, which are sitting on the shelf in Switzerland right next to a pack of cigarettes. And in a society that's becoming more and more health conscious, would we rather put nicotine and tar and all these other things into our bodies, or something, a raw flower from a cannabis plant, which is rich in CBD, which is a much healthier alternative to smoking a cigarette. And that's kind of where that took off. And from that, then they started to work on breeding genetics, because now they could, below 1% is unregulated. So it just spawned a whole industry there, and that's kind of where PureGene comes from. And PureGene's a really significant player in the hemp and cannabis business. I mean, they've got over 20 PhDs in their business now. This business wouldn't exist if cannabis was still outlawed.
No, fully. And I love this example because, a simple regulatory decision based on adequate assessment of risk has now introduced a model. That model's created jobs. It hasn't adversely affected the safety of the consumer. In fact, it's helped them in terms of giving them an alternative to nicotine-based products. So that for me is a win on multiple levels, and it's also allowed them to safely look at things like these recreational models they're piloting in the different cantons for other types of projects. And I like the Swiss's approach to investigating it. It's really very progressive, and it's fantastic to see because if I think of PureGene and the 20 PhDs, I mean, maybe you can give us some context on this, because I'm sure what they're doing is they're investigating all the different verticals that can come from. I mean, I've recently had a discussion on, the ability for hemp plastics to be subsidized, materials to be, fiber to be focused on, proteins to be focused on. I mean, tell me more. Maybe you know a bit about the kind of focus these PhDs are taking in terms of, I imagine, plant breeding and optimizing for certain chemovores and phenotypes to feed into these facilities. Yeah.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, the CEO of PureGene, which falls under the Pure Holdings group. So under Pure Holdings, there's three divisions. One is Pure Pharma, which is looking at the medical side, which will hopefully be opening in Switzerland soon. The other is Pure Production, and that's where our offtake of flower is going to in Switzerland. And they're listed in about 4,000 points of sales in Switzerland. And thirdly, PureGene is their breeding company, and that's headed up by Dr. Gavin George, who's South African.
Yeah.
Actually from Stellenbosch University.
Yeah, he is. He's an awesome guy. Very, it's lovely. I met him 2 years ago. Fantastic chap.
Yeah. So within PureGene, they're kind of compartmentalizing their breeding program into certain sectors. So, for example, food. So they're looking at breeding high protein genetics or strains of hemp that will, compete with conventional sources of protein like soya. So if soya's got a certain tonnage per hectare, remember soya's been bred for the past 30, 40 years or even more. It's kind of reaching the peak of its breeding cycle. You're not going to get another 50% of protein out of soya. Hemp is starting at a much lower base. The research hasn't even started really. And it's sitting 20, 30% under soya. So, give that 2-3 years and it'll be on par with soya. Give it another 5 or 10, it's going to way exceed that. So
yeah, that's very exciting. The point you raised there, I don't interrupt you, but that is a massive benefit to this early access to plant research. And I think that's exactly what we mean with the Plant Improvement Act. But please continue, because it's not just the protein aspect. There's so much more.
Yeah. So, I mean, just think about, what that's going to do to food prices. Yeah. I mean, you're going to be producing food on the same area at a lower cost. And, I mean, as well as I do, I mean, cannabis grows anywhere. It grows everywhere. Unlike soya, which needs certain soil, certain water, it's got more specific climate requirements. But, I mean, I'm sitting here and drive along the road and you can see a cannabis plant growing anywhere. So that's the food aspect to this. I mean, following on food, there's also animal feed, breeding high fat content into the plants, which is great for animal feeds. Then you're looking at another sector, which is industrial application. So here you're looking at the high fiber genetics, so for fiber production, and you're also looking at high lignin genetics. So inside the plant, in the middle, there's this oily substance. If that's extracted, run through a processing plant, we can use that for bioplastics. And the bioplastics is great. I mean, if you look in South Africa's context, the Eastern Cape and KZN, as President Ramaphosa said, those are the focus areas. Well, imagine if we we need to obviously build the processing capacity here, but if we had cooperatives there where people could grow hemp, high lignin genetics, take it to the cooperative, get paid for their product, run that through the facility, or even they have a share in the facility, be able to push out bioplastics for car dashboards, components, single-use plastics. I mean, there's really, and this is all biodegradable products. There's just amazing potential there, and that's basically the industrial applications. And then finally, and everyone's been focused on, it's the medicinal side. I think it's the smaller side of the sector. Actually, I think the industrial and food production is way bigger and has way bigger potential for South Africa. But the medicinal side is huge. I mean, focusing on novel cannabinoids such as CBN, CBG, THCV. That's just amazing. And the PureGene guys, in the work that they've done, they've mapped pangenome of cannabis. So they know that this link of DNA is responsible for THC content. This is for mildew tolerance. This is for fiber content. lignin production. They've got maybe 100 different key areas, and they're breeding traits. So they're breeding for specific traits that are in the cannabis plant. So that if Levi's jeans would like to move off cotton, which is incredibly unsustainable, and move to hemp, they're going to want a high fiber genetic and be able to give that to farmers to grow, take the hemp into processing for textiles to make their jeans for them. So now you're starting to look at the whole sustainability factor of making clothing, and this is where they're focusing their business.
No, absolutely. I agree fully with all those points. I do see the same, which is the potential, especially in Africa, for industrial related. And I mean, it's always unfair to call it hemp because it's the same plant, but for industrial cannabis, industrial hemp, to really grow that sector, it's so suited and needed in the space. And the aspects on the dietary and the substitution of diets, it's almost, we have to get going. Some regulatory pen strokes, and we can really start to unlock potential, because it needs to happen, like you've alluded to the Plant Improvement Act and the percentages, because there are people looking to get industrialized and build agro-processing capacity. Like with the jeans, with textiles, it's far more nuanced than people often understand. So, maybe we start off with building materials, the grain, and, basic fiber products or substitutes. But we'd love to see the point where I don't want to wear this cotton shirt. It's a hot day. We're in Africa. Getting something like a hemp-based fabric that's of high quality and not irritable to the skin is going to be amazing to see, because we don't want just China and others to dominate in that space. It's just not practical to ship industrial hemp large ways. So fully supporting this. And I want to get to another point. I mean, there's what you've been doing with the tissue culture side as well. So before I maybe jump to the relationship you've had on tissue culture with Perfect Plants, I have always a technical question, and it's maybe one I want to throw in here, because often you get different versions of it and people misunderstand it. But, the term phytosanitary certificates, in a short, brief explanation, can you give us a bit of an overview what that actually means and why it's important in terms of, we know about the virus side of it and the things that can creep in, but why phytosanitary is actually important? And it's not just for local, because there is a lot of the import side, but you are exporting to multiple regions. And because you are exporting to multiple regions, and most recently Canada as well, the stringency on these aspects is quite important. Maybe you could just give us a bit of a synopsis on that.
Yeah. I think the easiest way to explain it is the process that we take when we do an export. So when we want to make an export to Canada, for example, then we basically, the Canadians, they need to go to their Department of Agriculture and say, guys, we want to import something from South Africa. We want to import cannabis from South Africa, and it's in its live plant material. Please let us know what needs to be on the phytosanitary certificate. So the Canadian agricultural authorities, they then go and do an investigation. They look at all the different pests that are currently in South Africa that are a potential threat to Canada. And they list those, and they say, we don't want this pest or this disease or this virus or anything like that. So they list all those things that are of concern to them, that are maybe endemic in South Africa, but also globally. And that forms their import permits. We then get that import permit. And now, the beauty of tissue culture is it's grown in sterile conditions. It's grown in sterile medium. It's virus-free, disease-free, pest-free. So clearly it meets all the requirements anyway. But anyway, it's still on this import permit. We then take that import permit, Canadian import permit. We take a sample to the Department of Agriculture. They do an inspection on it, and they certify it that it's free of all those pests and diseases listed on the Canadian import permit. And they provide us with a phytosanitary certificate.
Awesome.
And that's what goes with a shipment. And I think, I can't discount how amazing it is to get a cannabis product into another jurisdiction. Because if you take just fruit, for example, it's only phytosanitary, it's only agriculture that it has to comply with on the other side. If I'm shipping morphine, it's only health that it needs to comply with on that side. Cannabis falls into both categories. So not only do we need to satisfy customs requirements, we need to satisfy agriculture requirements and health requirements. And when you're shipping a live plant, it's all about time.
Yes.
And you need to have a health inspection, and you need to have an agriculture inspection and a customs approval. So that just to think that we're able to get this material out of South Africa and into Spain or Switzerland or Canada or Israel is quite something to think about. And we've had a few hair-raising moments where shipment has been stopped for a certain reason or something. But we're pretty impressed that every shipment that we've done has been completely cleared and successfully received on the other side.
No, awesome. I mean, it speaks volumes to the level of planning. And thank you for that as well, because I think the industry benefits as a net result of the work you put in. Because, it's sometimes tricky getting not just the regulatory environment locally to work with you, but and in a timely manner. So let's use the time factor.
Yeah.
But to get the same done in multiple jurisdictions, North Macedonia, Spain, Lesotho, Canada, the list goes on, Switzerland. So it's actually pioneering work, and it's actually enabling the industry, which is fantastic to see. Yeah. And that's why I've always enjoyed your press releases in terms of what's been happening with the materials.
Yeah. Jeff, the other thing is, we're working with Perfect Plants. They are brilliant at what they do. Absolutely incredible. They've got a sales team sitting in Canada, in Europe, in the UK, and their base is in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
They've got PhDs working on optimization of propagation methods. They've got whole technical teams just trying to figure out that this genetic doesn't like this specific agar, but it likes that agar. Or this is the agar we use to ship in, and this is the agar we use to store in, and this is the routing method. So there's an incredible amount of work that's going on in the background, and that's being pushed to South Africa to basically deploy. So, in the lab, in our lab at Felbridge, we've got the guys who are following these new protocols, are changing agar recipes, and it's quite incredible. So, I think, I know, it's a Felbridge post, but I mean, the Perfect Plants guys are just absolutely incredible what they do. And there's just no ways that we would have ever have got, been in a position to do these exports if it wasn't for them. So, we have to give them super credit for the work that they're doing.
No, absolutely, and I'll say this: you've selected really the best partners. I've known I've known Perfect Plants less, but I've known Pure Gene a little better, and from just how you've positioned yourself, and I think it's also unique because you are kind of in a separate bundle from everyone else with medical cannabis licenses, because there seems to be a heavy THC dominance, where your dominance tends to be on really focusing on the day-to-day, learning your lessons on the CBD, CBG side of it, less maybe narcotic handling as intensive, but it's it equips you. And in talking about equipping, I mean, I'd like to raise something as well, because I know from previous discussions, I mean, you have mentioned in the past that you have the capacity in a single run to generate up to 100,000 clones for a given genetic. Maybe can you just allude to, that capacity, and maybe also how that capacity supports potentially local partners, and then also it's already serving a lot of international partners. But maybe let's focus on that capacity you're building for Africa.
Yeah. So early on we realized that's one of the most, and listen, we come from farming, so we see this in farming as well, is it's all about scale. We look at cannabis going the same way as pretty much any other crop. Margin, and don't look at it in the South African context, look at it in global context. Germany's current consumption is 15 tons. Our potential production is between 6 and 10 tons. In other words, we can do 2/3 Germany's production, which just makes you think how much production is still coming on stream.
Yeah.
So that that's a great concern, not only to us, but should be to every license holder, is there's massive supply coming. And markets are pretty slow in opening up. They are opening up, but pretty slowly. So, we see a certain level of commoditization that's going to happen in cannabis. And what that's going to come down to is producing the right quality at the right price. And you need scale to do that.
Yeah.
And we've positioned our business to do that. And I think over the past 2 years, that's why we've gone into CBD, is to learn to scale the business quickly. So we've moved from starting in a 70 square meter room, moving to an 800 square meter greenhouse, moving to 1,500 square meter greenhouse, moving to two of those rooms. And now we're currently on over 10,000 square meters of cultivation area that are currently under planting.
Wow.
And I can't tell you how important the scaling is, because the mistakes that we've made, I mean, it's I wouldn't want to make those mistakes when I'm doing THC. I wouldn't want to make those mistakes when I'm sitting and trying to get my product into Germany. We really want to get these problems sorted now. We've currently got a workforce of about over 40 people, and that's going to double as soon as the 10,000 square meter crop is kind of nearing its finish point. So so in terms of the cloning capacity, because we're now scaling up, we need the backbone to support us, and the backbone is the propagation side of the business. So we need quite large areas for mothering, and then we need large cloning capacity. And the cloning capacity, we also see, because we've got perfect plants and pure gene as tissue and genetics providers, and perfect plants is bringing in a lot of very exciting breeding companies on board. By having the backbone there to be able to propagate, we can now propagate for other license holders. And cannabis has come from that black market environment where you kind of did everything. You had your mother plants there, you took your clones, you flowered, you did everything yourself. But if you take apples, strawberries, pretty much every crop, even vegetables, you don't have your own nursery. You don't need this. And we want to really focus on being able to supply license holders with their plant requirements, that they don't need expensive mother rooms, have to maintain mothers and genetics all the time. Let us do that. You tell us when you want your plants and how many plants you want, and on that date, those plants will be at your door. And if you want to do a subscription where you say, I'd like to do that 4 times a year, so be it, 4 times a year. But the issue is you also need to be able to adapt very quickly. And I think this is where the cloning capacity is going to start speaking, really start working for us, is when we start moving from CBD to THC, we're able to move into using the cloning capacity we've got to really move very quickly in and out of genetics. So we can do CBD now, we can do THC, then we can go to a CBG genetic, but the cloning capacity needs to be there to support us, and we've got that in place.
No, awesome, 100%. Right? You hit a few points there. I mean, the first one was, for me, the flexibility. So that's super important. And this is what anyone who's in the cannabis industry appreciates, or should be appreciating, is the fact that you need to be flexible. You also need to understand that you need to be able to start to understand where you're good. It's very difficult to run businesses where you're fully vertically integrated. I mean, this may have been a requirement in certain states in the US. In Canada, it's very much split, which is almost a good model because everyone forms specialization around an area where they're really strong. And if you're really strong on, relationships, distribution, and that side of the business, you don't want to be now also struggling with a master grower and how to cultivate and how are you maintaining that, and is there something getting in there that's compromising the phytosanitary aspects. It's extremely complicated. Also, it's often not seen for what it is, which is to some degree it's a pharmaceutical hybrid with agriculture, which means you need to understand the pharmaceutical side, which is, for me, that's a big pill to swallow in terms of just the timelines you need to appreciate when it comes to dealing with that framework. So no, I love that aspect of it's nice to have that ability to source it and not deal with maybe the input genetics, and you just go into your business side where you're really strong in terms of finishing off product, getting it ready. And the other aspect I really enjoy is the focus on the consistency around tissue culture and clones. If you know anything about the international markets, especially if you guys migrating to THC in the future, it's going to be one of consistency. Like a physician wants to prescribe the same dosage form it did 6 months ago and titrate against certain levels if it's an extract, so that they can know what the indication and how the patient's responding, to the dosage levels, because that's the basis of some medical framework. So, you need to understand the dose. And for me, you don't understand the dose, especially with a herbal preparation, unless you can quantify it. And if you keep having to test to quantify and demonstrate the same dosage, it gets expensive. So, the fact that there is that underlying consistency, love it. It's exactly what the industry does require. So fantastic on that regard. I think, this has been a great chat, and we're going to have a lot more of these probably in the future, because it's such a high level conversation and much needed, I feel, in the industry to just unpack, firstly what Felbridge positioning is. It's not, hidden in a corner and trying to dominate. You're really trying to collaborate. And the other aspect is it just opens up the experience base, and the same things about the Plant Improvement Act, things we need as an industry address and lobby to get addressed. But the thing I want to maybe discuss is, this comes up a lot, not just in the States, it comes up locally a lot, and I understand where it's coming from in terms of inclusion. Like how do we to maybe close out in South Africa? It's a bit of it's always been a very dynamic culture. There's always been a lot of disparities within the societal framework. How do we start enabling it's a tough question, so I hope you don't mind me asking it, but it is one the government's trying to address, which is how do we start making the hemp industry, and maybe that's easier than the cannabis industry for the moment because it's medicinal when it comes to cannabis, which means there are some serious barriers to entry. But going forward with industrial hemp, how do we make the space more inclusive and more collaborative while still maintaining an acceptable quality that makes the industry flourish? Maybe you have a few closing comments on that.
Yeah, I think we're very aware. I mean, we're white farmers living in a country that's got a history, and we've got a very, very open model in our business. So we don't view another license holder as a competitor. I don't have an issue if there's another 500 cannabis license holders in the country. That's not a problem for me. I have a problem with other countries. Those are our competitors. Our competitors are going to be Colombia, our competitors are Uruguay, maybe even some states in Africa. But I don't think South Africans or South African license holders should be concerned about other license holders. I think we're very open. We want to collaborate with guys. We want to work with other license holders. And that's why, we want to be able to supply them with tissue culture or rooted clones or seed. I think when it comes to inclusivity, medical cannabis by its very nature has these huge barriers to entry. And rightly or wrongly so. At the end of the day, if it's medical cannabis, you're making medical products. And you were speaking about the safety and repeatability and consistency of it. Those are barriers on their own. You can't make a medicine and have it one way the one day and another way the other day. It doesn't work. So just by its very nature, the barriers are there. I suppose there's barriers to entry of every industry. But I think maybe if government looked at it more and said, well, let's also take a view and say, traditional healers have been using cannabis for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. Let them use it, let them do it, let them work in that way. If it's worked for them for these years, like why stop it now? Why put hurdles up for that? Maybe embrace that. In another sense, I mentioned the hemp industry, and people say, oh, but the money's in medical cannabis. Listen, we haven't made big money or anything yet. We've spent a lot of money. We've invested an absolute fortune into the business. It's going to take years to roll out that strategy and to make revenue or to make profits at the end of the day. So I wouldn't discount the hemp industry, industrial uses or food or anything like that. And I think that's potentially where there's a lot of scope to really make it inclusive and to form these cooperatives and to empower people to actually run those cooperatives to grow the industry. So we've also actually had discussions with the Western Cape Department of Agriculture. We've had the extension service on. I think must have been over 75 people on the call, fielding questions, explaining what what medical cannabis is, possibly where hemp falls into this. And, we're actually going to be hosting them at Felbridge, just that they can go out into their communities that they serve and actually assist farmers with it. So we want to basically help. We're also trying to develop some kind of training system or work with our agriculture department in the Western Cape, because we're based here, but try and actually help with training or just getting guys into the industry, and that would be completely free or subsidized, for previously disadvantaged groups, to be able to get into the sector at a lower hurdle.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot that we can do. I think there's always more that we can do. But, I don't know what more to say about it. But
No, I get you on this one, so I'll pick it up on that point because I agree with you. Hemp is exactly where, there's certain fundamental enablements that need to happen because medical has significant higher barriers. And the thing I've always tried to push is let's get ourselves to the first 1,000, 2,000 medically approved patients, because then it does raise the already issue with that, which is those are SAPRA approved, it goes through a fee, it goes through this whole process, and slowly the regulator and the state will realize that it's a barrier to entry to now get an approval every time to get your medicine. So now we start to enable maybe a more comprehensive and accessible look at it. So now maybe medicinal cannabis can be facilitated more easily, that allows for broader access. And for me on the medical side, that's fundamental. So for me, I'm really pushing so that we get quality products to patients first, but that we also make that process more automated and accessible. And with that, we will hopefully see the barriers to entry, at least the patient base will improve. But on hemp, we're completely open for opportunity because, there's where, a lot is now finally happened in October last year. But we can finally, with a few smart consultations and decisions, enable an industry that is for the people and for the benefit of the people. Because it's nutrition, it's building materials, it's fiber. Like these are very practical because the end use is not human inhalation or let's call vaporization. So the risk to the product and the consumer is significantly downplayed because it's the end use. So whether it's getting sequestered into building products, or it's, there we have to be careful maybe around the seed and what's contacting the skin, because the skin is still the biggest organ in the body. But it's manageable. It's far more manageable and accessible. And I just want to thank you for your time, because I think a lot of what we talked about today is exactly about trying to manage, facilitate, stakeholders within government to see, how do we build a sustainable future. And hemp for me is just absolutely paramount to sustainability in the sector. And when we get carbon credits and those kind of things also starting to weigh into it, it's really going to accelerate the potential of hemp. And that's such a big portion by itself. The medical side, I'm passionate about, but like you've said, it's still it will be a fundamental aspect of health in the future. But it's still going to be significantly smaller than when we think about sustainability. And I thank you for your time. I don't know if you got some closing comments.
I think, Jeff, there was just one more thing I also wanted to add. I was listening to what you were saying, and when we're discussing the three things that would unlock the medical cannabis side, or even start to grow the hemp side, there's one thing that other countries, Switzerland's doing it, Germany's doing it, in the US they're talking about it, and that's adult use. And that's also kind of forgotten here, is that, it's one thing to, if we were to do lift it to 1% and take it off the drugs list, that would get us to where Switzerland is now. That would get us to where a lot of countries are now. But let's look further than that. Let's develop the framework for adult use and say, guys, let's bring inclusivity in and say, okay, guys, only empowered companies can sell it, or and we grow it. It's there's a lot of opportunity there, and we mustn't only look at the medical side, but we need to actually move the discussion on and say, guys, let's not start to legalize adult use yet, but let's start to talk about what the framework's going to look like and have a roadmap and say, listen, that's our plan in the next 3 years. That's the way Switzerland's doing it, and saying they're not looking at medical. They're going to open up medical in the next 3 to 6 months. So that's happening. But at the same time, they're talking about adult use, and they're talking about 2023. And we're not even talking about it yet. We're not
Yeah.
even talking about the tax revenue from it. So I mean, look what America is now. Cannabis is the fifth biggest
Yeah.
crop in the country
Yeah.
from nothing.
Exactly, and I'll add
So
to that. I mean, it's now really 25 billion in taxable income. California by itself in the illicit market is estimated at 10 billion untaxed. So that gives you already some big numbers. And I saw Canada's
yeah,
numbers from 2018 where they went adult use, which is less than it's now 2022. They've done something like $45 billion Canadian dollars and created 93,000 jobs in the adult use market. And I mean, I've covered this as well, where irresponsible sale of high THC drinks is happening in candy stores. I mean, what stops government from really stepping in and say, look, we want to put frameworks in place, treat it. I know it'll be treated separate from alcohol, but there needs to be a license procedure around responsible adult use, and then completely different
yes,
world for prescription based medicines that are going to go to vulnerable patient subsets. And these are actually
exactly.
it's manageable. It is a task. It's not easy. From the agricultural and the health aspects playing together, it's a challenge, but at least everyone's starting to talk about it. And thank you for making your time available, because this has been, for me,
No, no, thanks.
it's an awesome conversation, and I know many people will appreciate it. And I just hope they get the full value out of this. And I definitely hope we're going to have more conversations to see the progress that Felbridge has undergone, and maybe some of even spotlighting some of the local partnerships that have been integrated to show and demonstrate to South Africans that we're not in silos. We've got to work as a community. We've got to pull together, and we've also got to lobby for the interests of building a sustainable industry, and that's to the benefit of government. So we will be able to get their buy-in to facilitate this, because we need job creation. That is abundantly clear
Yeah,
in the country. So,
yeah,
Leslie, I just have to thank you once again
right.
for making the time. And I'm looking very much
No,
forward to this. And please, anyone watching, be sure to jump into the comments with questions. I'll try to facilitate. And if there's something I can't handle, I'll ask Leslie's opinion over email, pop it in there. And then let's just keep building this industry. And congratulations on setting the framework, especially around exports of genetic material, to make it easier for everyone else in the future.
yeah. Thanks, Jeff. And I also just want to give a credit to our team. We've got a brilliant, brilliant growing team. We've got a brilliant team of workers on the farm, and I mean, our success would not be anywhere near what it is if it wasn't for the brilliant team we've got. So, I just really want to just mention them.
Yeah,
They're fantastic.
absolutely. Absolutely. I know you worked with James and others throughout this process, and
Yes.
it's really good individuals. I mean, James was one of the first people I ever met in the industry, and he was such a friendly, open person to just have a conversation. And I was big pharma in a sense because I came from that background, but I was just trying to understand and appreciate the dynamics within not just the culture, but how do we get to a point where we formalize and we make it more destigmatized so people can really just benefit from a botanical
Yeah.
product. At the end of the day, these are botanicals. Like, let's not lose sight of the fact that plants exist with humans for a reason, and we need to capitalize on that. Synthetic single drug molecules is something I know a lot about, but it's also not natural. So why do we not go back to natural roots and really harness the African botanical potential? And that's really an underlining theme for me, is African botanicals will
Yeah.
dominate world markets, especially European markets, in the next decade. So we are well positioned for the sector to grow. And it's great to see your capacity to facilitate that in the space.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks very much for the
Thanks so
opportunity.
much. Appreciate your time.
Okay.